This is the Fifth Estate Winning Headlines, your media police post. In this segment, we summarize some of the headlines that you may have missed this morning, but we also take a look at the political pieces that we call cartoons in this country. Today is the 1st of December 2020, and I am 2J.
I'm JM.
And I am Miss K, your host. Again, in case you missed today's headlines, here they are. Daily Nation, fresh BBI demands by Ruto men. The Standard, 2022 election date headache, and The Star, how Karua Ndi Kibwana intend to stop BBI push.
Happy new month, guys.
Happy new month.
Can you believe we made it through 2020?
I can't believe we made it, and I can't wait for Christmas. If at all we'll have it, maybe more lockdowns. I think we should start with The Star.
Yeah, so in The Star, we're told that a well-coordinated plan has been set in motion to forestall the BBI constitutional amendment bill. The leaders of the No campaign, whose political faces are Karua and Kibwana so far, are planning an execution in 3 phases. First, they will mount legal battles in court. If that is unsuccessful, they will call for mass action. And finally, if that is unsuccessful, they will lead a robust No campaign. Now, regarding the legal battle they intend to mount in court, that is their first call of action, which they've already started on. I think on the 15th of September they lodged a case. Yesterday they secured a victory when the Constitutional Court Judge Anthony Mirima declined to throw out a case challenging BBI. It was filed by these 5 activists: Ndi, Jeritage Say, a guy called Ngondi, Gikonyo, and Angele. And so the petitioners, through their lawyer Nelson Havi, want the court to declare that 5 chapters of the Constitution of Kenya 2010, that is chapters 1 on the sovereignty of the people and supremacy of the Constitution, chapters 2 on the Republic, 4 on the Bill of Rights, 9 on the executive, and 10 on the judiciary. What they're saying here is that those chapters cannot be altered or changed through amendments, either by Parliament or by popular initiative. They argue that these chapters form the foundation, the basic structure of the country, and so therefore they cannot be altered. And in essence, what they're telling us here really is that they can never, ever, ever, ever be amended.
Exactly.
They're set in stone forever and ever, amen.
Yeah.
And so the judge surprisingly found merit in this petition, and so yesterday he referred the matter to the CJ to constitute a bench to hear and determine the case, declaring it a matter of immense public interest.
Yeah.
Now I want to say one thing before we move on to the other papers. It's absolutely ridiculous to think this way.
Yep.
Since when did constitutions become fixed and immutable? Let me say 2 things here. The first, allow me to paraphrase the words of John Maxwell, the American author and pastor, who says formulas will change, but principles remain fixed. And I think what we want to change with the BBI process is not the principles per se, but the formulas. And formulas are constantly changing as a society changes. And indeed, that is the essence of the bill. The second thing, in closing, Article 1 of the Constitution says all sovereign power belongs to the people of Kenya and shall be exercised only in accordance with this Constitution.
Yeah.
Now, for them to tell us that we cannot amend our Constitution means that they don't even recognize the principle of all sovereign power resting with the people.
Yeah, I also think fundamentally to say that things in the Constitution are not changeable defeats the point of a Constitution. I think the US is such a perfect example.
Yeah.
It has a very tight and rigid Constitution, and it's very hard to make amendments. But I think once they recognize that some things are fundamentally not recognizable in their state, they change it. My favorite example is that of prohibition of alcohol. That was in the Constitution. It was something that was illegal. And eventually they realized this is not tenable. And so what did? They changed it.
Yeah.
Other things like the right to bear arms has been a bit more complicated. It's been harder to change, but I think that they're beginning to reach that point where they see this is a piece of the Constitution that cannot remain any longer. So fingers crossed, CJ Maraga, does not agree with that court that made that decision. Yeah,
I do agree that Constitution should be strong enough that they protect the citizen, but they should also be flexible enough that they change with the changing times and society as it moves along.
Yeah.
Before we go on to the Daily Nation, I'd like to say that we have a 3-part criteria that we use to break down the headlines for you. We ask ourselves 2 questions. Is the headline topical or speculative? Is it repetitive or groundbreaking? And finally, is it thoughtful or just plain lazy? What do we say about the Star's headline?
I think it is an accurate headline, but it is boring. Nothing
Therefore,
more, nothing less.
We toss it.
No, a bit topical. I think we'll park it.
Okay, put it in the sparking
Park it.
bay. Daily
That's
Nation. Fresh BBI demands by Ruto men.
Yes, so I think this is just another series of headlines where we're seeing Ruto's camp try to find a way to stall the BBI in whatever way they can. And so one of the most recent ideas that they have thought up is that voters should be allowed to cherry pick the proposals of the constitutional amendment bill. So instead of us voting through the referendum for either yes or no, they want us to split all the composite bits into single votes. This has been suggested by Ruto himself, by some people who spoke yesterday, by the Tharaka Nithi senator, and by somebody else, I can't remember. But essentially they're saying that Kenyans should be allowed to go to the ballot and say, we want to go for an executive prime minister. We want to reform IEBC and all the various things that are within the constitutional amendment bill. And even within the Elections Act 2011, it does say that you can either have the referendum question as a whole or multiple questions that are framed by the IEBC.
I do think that is very, very, very dangerous. I don't think that as Kenyans we've grown sufficiently in our civic thought to enable us.
Yeah, I think, hold on, let me just say what I really thought.
Okay.
I think it's a brilliant idea. I really honestly do. I think that a lot of countries have proven that having a single constitutional amendment bill is very difficult because when it's whole and parcel, you don't really know what's entailed in that one document. But I think, Ms. K, what you're alluding to is the fact that as Kenyans, we have not sufficiently reached a level of civic responsibility that we can be allowed and believed to know that we have gone through, that we've sufficiently gone through each of the points and weighed them to see, do I want this, do I not? So,
and when you complicate
there's a bit of hand-holding that's going on right now.
Yes, and when you complicate it in that manner by pulling each individual item out of that bill, you will confuse the public and they will then choose no. So they will then in the end throw out the baby with the bathwater.
Yeah.
What do we say about this headline?
I don't know. I feel like I've seen 10 of these headlines.
Therefore, we toss it?
Yeah, just toss it. Ruto's constantly making,
Finally, the standard, and I will take you through this really quickly. The essence of this story is that with an election coming in 2 years and a referendum proposed for mid next year and a boundary delimitation that is required by the Constitution that is meant to happen in the year, that was meant to happen in the year of our Lord 2020, beginning this time, there's a feeling that there will not be sufficient time to do all of these things. Therefore, to make sure we do them all, we should push the election date. However, we know that is a referendum issue in itself. So you cannot have those things. But there's also a statement that has been made that you will need to put, that you cannot do the boundary delimitation and then use it in that election. I think that is a misunderstanding. You can do the boundary delimitation with a year to go to the election. However, those new delimitations will not apply to that election, but will apply to the subsequent election, 2027. Therefore, I think we can do all of these things, but maybe we may have to push the 70 constituencies and all of the things that come with them and the new boundaries to the next election if we're not able to keep within the 1 year timeline.
Yeah,
wow, that's a very tight schedule.
It is.
So what do we say about the two headlines? 2020 election headache versus
I like
the
the star. How Karua and the Kibwana intend to stop BBI push. Quite a mouthful, but
it is a mouthful.
But it's I could buy that one.
I could take it as well because even with the boundary delimitation, we will have case law and cases that will then push the timeline further. So I think we keep the star as a headline and toss the standard.
Okay.
And that you have it. The star gives us our winning headline. Onto the political pieces that we call cartoons in this country, and just like the headlines, we have a 3-part criteria that we use to break them down for you. We ask ourselves 3 questions. Is the cartoon humorous or is it dry? Is it satirical or pessimistic? And finally, is it effective or just plain lazy?
In the Daily Nation, we have Ndula. And here we have caricatures of Uhuru, Raila, Mudavadi, Kalonzo, Murabe, and Atwoli. On the left, saying yes for BBI. And on the right, we have Karua Kibwana and Boniface Mwangi saying no for BBI. And in the middle, we have Deputy President William Ruto, who's not sitting on the bench, he's more floating, or kind of on the fence, and he's saying non-contested. I think the key word for the DP the past few months has been consensus. But I don't think he really knows what that means. And I think even his camp themselves, it's a word that they keep pushing, but they're not telling us what it means to them. What do they want? What do they want the constitutional bill to, have that is part of their philosophy? I mean, just from the cartoon, I think we can see that the yes side is far fuller than the no side. I don't know if that's an indication of where we may be heading, but yeah, I think definitely the guy's on the fence. So
yeah, absolutely.
So what do we say about this cartoon? Should we keep those who are of double minds?
I like it. I like it.
Let's park it for the moment.
Yeah.
Standard.
Yeah. So here in the standard we have King Solomon with a sword, and you've got you've got a baby, and on the what do you call this? This is an altar, whatever it is. 2010 Constitution.
Chopping board.
Chopping board, and you've got the baby there, and he's ready to wield, take the sword down. And then you've got Uhuru, Ruto, and Raila. So Uhuru says, let's divide it into 3. This is the baby. And then Raila is saying, no, let's divide it into 2. And then Ruto is at the corner saying, whatever the division, I must get the bigger piece.
Wow.
In reference there to the story of King Solomon and how he adjudicated the case between the 2 women who were contesting about who the baby belongs to. A rather
is it a baby because
one.
the 2010 Constitution is so young?
I think
is
so.
that the reference? Okay.
I think that's a reference in comparison to older constitutions like the American.
Yeah, I think in my opinion, this cartoon really is in favor of the president, saying that he wants to split it in 3, whereas the other 2 are more selfish, if I could say that.
Yeah, all round.
That's true, because in reference to the original story, the mother wanted it split, given the whole baby given to the other lady so the baby didn't die.
Yeah.
What do we say about this cartoon?
It's all right. I like it.
We can't keep 2. Pick one.
Let's see what the star has to offer and then we can make a decision.
Okay, in the star, we have a caricature of the former Nairobi governor, Sonko, being pushed onto a guillotine, and this guillotine is called impeachment. The blade is a razor, and we have, in fact, the irony is the hands that are pushing him, because you can only see the hands, are of a person in a green and yellow uniform, maybe reference to the NMS. And we have Ferdinand Waititu telling him on the side, save your breath, brother, save your breath.
Yeah, I think Sonko's time may be coming to an end, but who knows? I think it's a bit of a boring cartoon. I don't think there's any context for that right now.
Yes, that is
true. If I'm not wrong, yeah.
Mm.
So I think just based on the issue of context, yeah.
Then the star gets chopped off. What do we say about the Daily Nation and the Standard?
I think we'll go with the Daily Nation.
I agree, yeah. I like it.
Sitting on the fence, becoming
floating on the fence.
Sorts.
Yeah, it's an apt representation.
The Daily Nation gives us our winning cartoon. Now on to our final thought, but before we do that, please do not forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel.
And now our final thought. This week's theme is inspired by the law. So we're giving you Law 101. Yesterday we looked at tort law, and today we are going to take a shift and continue the headline and cartoon conversation and look at constitutional law. So just very simply, constitutions organize, distribute, and regulate state power. So they set out the structure of the state institutions, and the principles governing their relations between each other and with the state's citizens as well. And so I think, as I said yesterday, we'll use the Commonwealth example because I think that's what we also use in Kenya. Yeah. And I'll start with the British Constitution, which is the oldest modern constitution. And it's largely based on traditions and conventions. And it's very unusual because the British Constitution is largely unwritten. And unlike the majority of other countries, there is no single document in the United Kingdom which sets out the fundamental laws of how the state works. This is what is called an uncodified constitution. And this lack of written constitution is largely based on the country's history. So in other countries where there has been a revolution, a regime change, or even independence, it's been necessary to start from the beginning with, basic principles. But the British Constitution has evolved over such a long period of time that it has reflected a certain type of stability. So I mentioned that written constitutions are what are known as being codified, and unwritten are known as uncodified. So the British Constitution is based on case law, on customs, on legislation, whereas Kenya, what we have is a written document that governs how we operate as, a people. So written constitutions are not only likely to give you, issues of interpretation, because if you don't have something written, each person will interpret different sections differently. But they're also harder to change, the written ones. But unwritten constitutions tend to change gradually and continually and often, and they do so in response to the changing needs of the people. But when a constitution lays down the exact procedures for doing various things, it becomes very complicated. So in Kenya, as we see, we're going through a constitutional amendment process. And this can happen through like a majority process or through a referendum or popular initiative. There's different forms in different countries.
Yeah.
But the question is, I guess, how do you make an ideal constitution? And we look at the two options. In a codified constitution setup, you have stability because everything is there and it's written, but you often end up having stagnation. Things don't change frequently, so it gets a bit
outdated.
Yeah, outdated and boring, if I can say that. Whereas when it's uncodified, it's very flexible. Things can change at a moment's notice. In the UK, just a parliamentary decision can change a part of what they have.
Yeah.
But then sometimes you have things in flux, which becomes a bit unnerving. So you can argue, though, that constitutional systems are most successful when they combine these two things, the procedural stability, but then also that flexibility. That is, they preserve those procedural elements, right? That in order to change something, there has to be an amendment. So procedures always stay the same. But then they're always facilitating this, adoption of changing cultural norms and values and whatnot. So if we use that criteria for how a written constitution should operate, the greatest success is when a constitution is short and when it's vague and when it's generalized, not so specific that you end up having this rigidity, which I think is what we're beginning to see in Kenya right now. And so we see that constitutions begin to change when they just simply fail to work, when they fail to accommodate the changing environments, and you end up having these constitutional crises that end up having very frequently. Yeah. When there's an issue with judicial interpretation, and I think the case Jonathan gave us today is proof of that, when you have issues with the regime and power sharing. And I think that right now we're beginning to see that Kenya is in the middle of this constitutional crisis, and I think it's inviting us to question, do we need to change what constitution we have? Yeah.
Let me talk about constitution amending procedures, and I'll talk about this very specifically to our context, and also in reference to the case that I've spoken about earlier of David Ndie and the NIHILISTS against Attorney General and the government. Now, from early Greek history, democracies have always been associated with constant legal change. And similar to legislation, constitutions also require change as circumstances alter and as flaws reveal themselves. Okay. We have a clearly spelled out constitutional amendment process in the COK 2010, and an amendment process that makes it difficult for politicians in their chambers to make changes without consulting the people. Virtually all the major constitutional provisions require amendment through a referendum. You may recall that in our previous constitutional dispensation, all we needed was a single vote of the National Assembly to enact such changes, but we've moved away from that. And so the framers of this constitution compelled the political class to be more deliberative and more consultative with the people, particularly on these fundamental changes. And they touch on, amongst other things, supremacy of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, as well as the independence of the judiciary, the structure of Parliament, and so on and so forth. And so the amending process requires the participation of county assemblies in recognition of the importance of input from the sub-national actors in our government. Members of parliament as well are included. And sometimes, in fact, I think it's Article 256, which even says that it will bypass the parliament and go directly to the people. Once again, reiterating Article 1 of the Constitution, which states all sovereign power belongs to the people of Kenya and shall be exercised only in accordance with this Constitution. And by the way, research in political science shows that, and this is just to buttress your point, 2J, that longer constitutions are amended more frequently than shorter ones. And research in political science also shows that documents that are difficult to change are also the ones which promote high levels of judicial interpretation, as you know, we're already seeing in our context right now. And so Kenyans, please do not be misled. Do not be misled by the nihilists who are telling you that the constitution is cast in stone. As I said, from early Greek history, democracies have always been associated with constant legal change. And so, you know, our constitution requiring change now is because it has revealed the flaws, it has revealed a change in our circumstances, we have to share power, and so on and so forth. Our constitution, lastly, is a product of a convention of delegates from various parts of this country who congregated since the late 1990s after the 1997 election. The proposed BBI amendments are also the product of a participatory process, not just of the last 2 years, but in fact of the last 20 or 25 or so past years, of the bombers conferences between 2003 and 2005. In fact, the BBI proposals are a combination of the bombers draft and the WACO drafts of 2005.
I think
There's
people
nothing
often
new.
forget that,
Absolutely. These are things we've taken, we're bringing from a shelf, from the bombers draft of 2005, the WACO draft of 2005, and we're now reintroducing them to say that we are ready now for these amendments. And our amending processes have also been crafted in a manner that reflects broad-based consensus. That's a long and short of
where we are right now.
Where we are and the constitutional amendment process.
I'd like to give a little bit of context. I do like what Tujay said, and I'd like to remind you all, for those of you who are not non-lawyers, that there are two types of constitutions. You have written ones and unwritten ones. The oldest unwritten constitution belongs to the UK. The oldest written one, I think, belongs to the US. And we as Kenya have adopted the form of having written constitutions. And when we have written constitutions, they're general, what they call constitutional doctrines that go with having a constitution. These are the separation of power, the rule of law, parliamentary sovereignty, the independence of the judiciary, and these terms are thrown out loosely by civil society in reference to what they call bad constitutions or good constitutions. And in the past, it has been stated that, and I think this was by Okoth Ogendo, the renowned constitutional thinker and lawyer, who said that you can have constitutions without constitutionalism. And I will speak a little bit about that, because that has been the basis for changes in our constitution. In fact, it was stated that our previous constitution, the 2009 constitution, was a constitution without constitutionalism. And I think it can be accepted. It did have a limited Bill of Rights, not that it did not have one at all, and it did have an expanded executive and strong powers resident within that body. There's a distinction. So I'd like to say that there's a distinction between a government with a constitution and constitutionalism, and a government with a constitution without constitutionalism. Bear with
Tongue-tied,
me.
wow.
Bear with me. These are tongue-tying things. Where the constitution is more a description of the makeup and the constitution of the political system, but without constitutionalism, meaning that those bodies are not bound by the rules that are in that constitution. It is paper without practice. And this can be said of the South African constitution. At the time when they were the apartheid constitution, the apartheid regime had a constitution without constitutionalism, because it was meant to subjugate the rights of certain members of society, persons such as myself, black people. And I'd like to also say that the American constitution was also at one point without constitutionalism. For instance, when they had the legality of slavery, again, subjugation of a people such as myself. But I'd like to ask you to ask some questions to yourselves as you think about this process of constitutional change that we're going into. Do we have a constitution that protects individual rights? Yes. Does our constitution establish and limit government? Yes. Does it show how the different arms of government will interact with each other? Yes. And have there been instances when the executive has bowed to the decisions of the judiciary, showing its independence? Yes. So, does the constitution reflect society as it currently is? I don't know.
Debatable.
Should it? Yes. We must stop this business of proclaiming that if I'm not in it, if it was not my idea, if I was not consulted, then I am against it. And we must review the Constitution for the issues and their contribution to the greater good. The greater good includes you and is higher and more loftier than just you. The late Supreme Court Justice Ruth stated that America had the oldest constitution, and it began with the words, "We the people." We the people exercise power either on our own through the ballot or in a delegated manner. Wouldn't you rather that you were consulted personally on the changes that will happen to your constitution? Today we had a winning headline from the Star and a winning cartoon from the Daily Nation. Have a great day, and I will leave you with a quote from Thomas Jefferson. It says, "Laws and institutions must go hand in hand with the progress of the human mind. Institutions must advance to keep pace with the times." Have a great day.